Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us. Today we're going on a mission basically to decode a personal operating system, one for leadership, wealth, and really just surviving the information age. And we're pulling from a pretty fascinating stack of sources for this. We've got excerpts from a book called Life is Rich, alongside a strategic framework document called Applied AI Leadership. Both of these are by an author named Nate Scott.
Yeah, and I have to say, it is a highly unusual combination of materials. We are looking at a real blend of personal memoir, rigorous financial strategy, and then this forward-looking technology analysis, all kind of synthesized into a single framework.
Right. And the trajectory of this author's life is really what grounds this material. I mean, to give you an idea of who we are dealing with here, Nate Scott went from being a 19-year-old combat soldier in Desert Storm to a commander at West Point. And then he transitions to the corporate world, becomes the chief financial officer of an Inc., 500 fastest growing company, and builds this massive $5 million real estate portfolio.
Which is wild.
It's incredible. But then when the 2007 financial crash hit, he lost that entire portfolio and was pushed to the absolute brink of homelessness. And from that total collapse, he rebuilt his life and his strategies to teach what he now calls applied AI leadership.
Exactly. So to set the stage for you, today's deep dive isn't just some simple list of financial tips or, a tutorial on the latest software updates. What we are doing today is looking at how to synthesize military-grade discipline, corporate financial intelligence, and modern artificial intelligence into a really actionable framework that you can apply to your own daily life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right at the beginning with his origin story, because I think it completely sets the tone for his entire methodology.
It really does.
So at 19 years old, he's serving in combat in the Middle East, and he finds himself in a situation that forces him to confront the absolute fragility of time. In the middle of that experience, he prays a very simple prayer. He basically says, "Lord, if you allow me to make it back, I promise I will never waste a day of my life."
And that foundational moment, that really forged an intense sense of urgency and discipline that dictated his subsequent path. I mean, he returns home, he accepts a congressional appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point.
Right.
And he studies computer science engineering. But he didn't just study there. He learned to operate in a high-stakes, pressure cooker environment. I mean, the Corps of Cadets at West Point is a military brigade of about 4,000 cadets, and they're divided into 4 regiments. The leadership of those regiments is entrusted to just 4 cadets, and he was selected as the 3rd Regimental Commander.
Wow. Leading 1,000 future Army officers at that age that's a massive undertaking.
It's huge. And the core lesson he took from West Point, and later serving as an infantry officer and an Army Ranger, it directly addresses the environment we are all navigating today. He realized early on that information is completely useless without disciplined execution.
Right, because West Point forges leaders who have to make decisions with real, sometimes fatal consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In those environments, clarity under pressure matters, and reliable systems will always outperform mere motivation.
That point about execution feels incredibly relevant right now to this current era of just unprecedented information overload. Because you can listen to 100 seminars, read 50 books a year, consume endless streams of content. But if you lack the discipline to execute, the information just becomes noise.
Yes.
The author makes a really compelling argument that we are drowning in information, but starving for structure.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. The modern problem isn't a lack of knowledge. I mean, you can find the answer to almost anything online in seconds. The bottleneck is system design. Without a personal operating system to process that incoming information and translate it into sustained action, people simply spin their wheels.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So after his military service, he transitions into the business world and eventually lands in the CFO seat of that Inc. 500 company. And sitting in those boardrooms, analyzing financial statements, he realizes that most people, even incredibly smart, hardworking professionals, fundamentally misunderstand how wealth is generated because they only focus on income.
Yeah, the traditional W-2 mindset trains us to focus almost exclusively on salary, right? Work hard, get a promotion, increase the inbound cash. But from a CFO's perspective, wealth is determined by economic flow. He breaks down every dollar that enters a household into 3 distinct channels where it inevitably disperses.
And those are taxes, fixed expenses, and consumption.
Exactly. Taxes, fixed expenses, and consumption.
It's so fascinating that massive empires aren't necessarily built on rare innovations, but on capturing the most mundane, predictable aspects of our daily economic flow. I mean, think about companies like Amazon, Costco, Walmart. They built multi-billion-dollar empires simply by organizing our household consumption.
That's exactly it. They recognized that families will always buy everyday goods, and they engineered flawless systems to capture that specific outflow. So the strategic takeaway here is to look at your own household economy. Most families unknowingly participate in a system where their everyday spending builds massive wealth for corporate empires, while they remain dependent on a highly taxed W-2 income.
So consider what would happen if you applied the exact same CFO level discipline to your household spending that these massive corporations do. Instead of letting the money flow out invisibly, what if you managed your personal expenses with corporate rigor, tracking the flow rather than just the inflow?
It requires a profound paradigm shift. It means transitioning from being a passive participant in the economy to an active manager of your own economic flow, seeking ways to retain and redirect those resources to build your own asset base.
But the sources make it very clear that his mastery of these systems didn't make him invincible.
Not at all.
By 2007, he had built a highly leveraged $5 million real estate portfolio. He had a 40-unit apartment complex in Maryland, luxury homes in Virginia, a vacation property. He was cash flowing over $12,000 a month.
Yeah.
And then the mortgage crisis hit, and the vulnerability of that massive leverage was exposed overnight.
What's fascinating here is the sheer speed of the collapse. The Inc. 500 company he worked for went bankrupt. The real estate market tanked. Suddenly, his total debt was over $4 million. Creditors were relentless, and he lost the properties. He went from managing millions to being on the verge of bankruptcy.
He describes taking a 7-day retreat during this period, kind of a halftime moment.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Like, if you're losing badly in a game, you don't panic on the field. You go to the locker room and figure out your strategy for the second half. And during this retreat, he realized his fundamental error. He was entirely confusing his net worth with his self-worth.
Decoupling his identity from his balance sheet was crucial for his recovery. When your self-worth is tied to your net worth, a financial crash destroys your ability to make rational decisions. You operate out of fear and ego. By separating the two, he adopted the be, do, have philosophy.
I love this concept because most of us operate in reverse. We think we need to jump from task to task, trying to do things so we can have money, so we can finally be considered successful.
Right. But he realized that to survive a collapse of that magnitude, you must first be grounded in your identity and character. That stable state of being dictates what you logically do to recover, which ultimately produces what you have. Because he established that baseline, he was able to evaluate his financial ruin clinically rather than emotionally.
Which allowed him to systematically rebuild.
Exactly.
And as he rebuilt, the sources detail the specific mechanics of wealth he used. And I gotta say, some of them deeply challenge conventional wisdom. Wait, I've always been told debt is the enemy. But if I'm understanding this right, the author argues that the fixed nature of a mortgage combined with inflation actually creates wealth. Like, that is basically getting cheaper over time.
That is the counterintuitive reality of the U.S. economy. Debt is the one thing that is not adjusted for inflation.
Okay.
If you borrow money to purchase an income-producing asset, like a rental property, inflation drives the value of that property up over time. It drives the rent you can charge up. But the numerical amount of debt you owe remains exactly the same.
So the expanding gap between the rising value of the asset and the static debt becomes your equity. The economic force of inflation is essentially paying off the debt for you in real terms.
Precisely. Wealthy individuals utilize debt as a tool to acquire assets because they understand this dynamic. This is entirely different from taking on consumer debt to buy a depreciating liability like a car or a TV. The strategy relies on evaluating investments through a strict lens, which he calls the ideal formula.
Let's break down that ideal formula because it synthesizes these mechanics perfectly. I is for income, so the actual cash flow the asset generates.
Right.
D is for deductions, the ordinary expenses and tax benefits. E stands for equity buildup, which is often the tenants paying down the mortgage principal for you.
Then you have A for appreciation, the asset naturally rising in value, heavily aided by inflation, as we just discussed. And finally, L is for leverage, using other people's money. The leverage is what amplifies the returns on the actual cash you personally invest.
So ideal. Income, deductions, equity, appreciation, leverage. Once you understand how to build wealth using these mechanics, the focus abruptly shifts to defense, because the sources draw a sharp contrast between amateur operations and professional structures.
They do.
Operating as a sole proprietorship or a general partnership basically means carrying unlimited personal liability. One lawsuit or bad debt, and your personal savings and home are on the line.
Establishing a corporate structure is the baseline defense. But the nuances matter. A C corporation allows you to deduct 100% of medical insurance premiums, but faces double taxation. The corporation is taxed on profits, and you are taxed again on dividends. Many opt for an S corporation instead to allow profits to pass through directly to a personal tax return, avoiding that double tax.
The geographic location of that entity also plays a strategic role, right?
Wow.
Incorporating in a state like Nevada is a classic maneuver because of the lack of state income tax and the really high level of privacy.
Yes.
They allow the use of bearer shares, where the specific stockholder isn't listed on a public registry. Whoever holds the physical certificate owns the company. That anonymity is a layer of defense against predatory creditors looking for deep pockets.
It is. But the most sophisticated defensive strategy detailed in the texts is the Family Limited Partnership, or FLP. This mechanism completely flips the power dynamic of a lawsuit. Let's walk through this slowly.
Okay, all right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of asset protection, the FLP is designed to separate control from ownership. Imagine you place your liquid assets into an FLP. Your spouse might be designated as the general partner, retaining total control over the partnership's decisions, despite owning perhaps only 2% of it. You become the limited partner, owning 98%, but you hold zero control over daily management or cash distributions.
Okay, let's say a creditor gets a judgment against you personally. They discover you own 98% of this partnership and assume they've hit the jackpot. They use a legal tool called a charging order to attach to your interest. What happens next?
Because they only acquire the rights of a limited partner, they have no authority to force the partnership to actually hand over any money. The general partner, your spouse, can legally decide to reinvest all the profits back into the partnership for future growth, declaring that no cash distributions will be made that year.
Wait, so the creditor gets absolutely no cash, but the partnership still generated income on paper. Does the IRS treat it like the creditor made the money, even though it's sitting in a bank account they can't touch?
That is the genius of the maneuver. The partnership issues a K-1 tax form to the creditor for their attached share of the profits. Let's say that's $50,000 of phantom income. The IRS now requires the creditor to pay the income tax on that $50,000, even though the general partner never distributed a dime of the actual cash to them.
That is wild. The creditor is legally forced to pay taxes on money they haven't received and can't access. It turns the asset into a liability for the attacker. No creditor wants to hold a tax bill with no cash to pay it, which immediately forces them to the negotiating table.
It's a masterclass in using legal and tax frameworks as a fortress. But as the author recovered from the 2007 crash and mastered these physical asset systems, he realized the landscape of wealth creation was undergoing another seismic shift.
The leverage of the future wasn't just bank debt or real estate, it was computational power.
Exactly.
The speed of wealth creation was shifting from the physical to the digital. And this brings us to the arrival of artificial intelligence, where platforms like ChatGPT, NotebookLM, and Descript are suddenly giving a single person the operational capabilities that used to require an entire corporate staff.
This raises an important question. If these powerful AI tools are widely accessible, why isn't everyone experiencing a massive leap in productivity and wealth?
Good point.
The author observed that people were furiously trying to learn the tactical features of the tools, but they lacked an underlying framework for leadership. Throwing advanced technology at a disorganized process just creates faster chaos. Technology without leadership is just noise. Technology guided by leadership creates transformation.
This realization is the genesis of his final framework. He integrates his three major life disciplines: the military leadership forged at West Point, the financial architecture from his CFO tenure, and the massive leverage of modern AI. He calls this synthesis applied AI leadership, and it is built on three distinct pillars.
Let's dedicate some real time to these pillars, because this is the operating system for the modern era. The first pillar is decision intelligence. This is a fundamental shift in how we interact with technology. It means treating AI not as a glorified search engine, but as a strategic thinking partner.
Think about how a CFO might use this. Instead of just asking an AI to summarize a document, decision intelligence means using the AI to wargame complex financial decisions. You can feed it your ideal formula metrics for a potential investment and instruct it to stress test the scenario against historical market downturns, identifying blind spots in your logic before real capital is deployed.
The second pillar is economic intelligence. This takes the CFO mindset we discussed regarding the household economy and supercharges it. It's about structuring your life and business to capture economic flow rather than simply trading hours for a paycheck.
And AI plays a critical role here. By utilizing AI to track, analyze, and optimize your household or business spending patterns, you can identify leakages in your economic flow with a precision that used to require a team of accountants. You use the technology to continuously audit your financial structure, ensuring your capital is retained and redirected into income-producing assets.
Which leads directly into the third pillar, execution systems. Remember the West Point lesson that systems will always outperform motivation. Execution systems are about using AI as the operational infrastructure to turn your ideas into repeatable, reliable processes.
This is where the solo operator gains the power of an organization. If you have a strategy to capture economic flow, you don't need to hire a massive staff to execute it anymore. You can build automated workflows where AI handles the data entry, the market research, the drafting of communications, and the scheduling. It replaces the manual labor of execution, freeing you to focus entirely on strategy and leadership.
The ultimate mission behind this framework is what the author calls the Life is Rich movement. The goal is incredibly ambitious: to equip 1 million families with these exact systems. He defines the end goal not just as acquiring money, but achieving true freedom. Specifically, freedom of time, freedom of money, and the freedom to live with purpose.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The core takeaway from synthesizing all these sources is that true wealth is not determined by a high salary. A high salary is vulnerable. It can vanish in an instant during a market crash.
Yep.
True wealth is organized economic flow. It is built on assets, protected by sophisticated legal structures, amplified by modern computational leverage, and guided by unwavering personal discipline. It all traces back to that 19-year-old soldier's promise in the desert to never waste a day.
Looking at the macro trends, the old industrial age economic model, the idea that you simply go to school, get a secure W-2 job, work hard, and rely on a pension at 65 is entirely obsolete. The future economy does not reward those who merely work hard, nor does it reward those who simply consume massive amounts of information. The future belongs exclusively to those who actively apply intelligence, both human and artificial, to engineer systems that generate enduring freedom.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this time discussing how artificial intelligence can now handle the deep research, the structural building, the financial analysis, and the daily operational execution that used to require armies of human employees. If the machines are now capable of doing all the doing, let me rephrase that. If the machines are doing all the execution tasks, what is the single most valuable, irreplaceable human skill you need to cultivate to remain relevant in the next decade? Something to explore on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.